Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we explore fascinating topics, really get into the source material, and pull out the key stuff you need to know fast.
Exactly. We try to make you instantly knowledgeable without, overwhelming you.
And today, we are zeroing in on a really intriguing dinosaur. It's got a bit of mystery around it. Shaochilong martuensis.
That's the one. We've got scientific papers, related research, basically a good pile of sources.
And our mission today.
Well, our mission is to unpack the whole story of Shaochilong for you. How it was found, how it got its name.
Its characteristics.
Yeah, what it looked like, and crucially, where it fits or maybe doesn't fit in the dinosaur family tree. There's quite a bit of ongoing discussion there.
Okay, let's dive in. Shaochilong. It sounds pretty intimidating. What's the name actually mean?
It translates from Chinese as shark-toothed dragon.
Shark-toothed dragon. Okay.
And that name definitely gives you a hint about, well, where scientists initially thought it belonged. We'll get into that.
Right. So where did this shark-toothed dragon first pop up in the fossil record? Where were the bones found?
The first fossils, the ones we now call Shaochilong, they were dug up in the Miaogo Formation. That's in Inner Mongolia in China.
Okay.
And they were actually described quite a while ago, back in 1964, by a paleontologist named Hu.
1964. So it's been known for a while.
Sort of.
Yeah.
But back then, Hu thought it was a new species of a different dinosaur,
Yeah.
Dinosaurs. He called it Chelantosaurus martuensis.
Ah, so it was lumped in with something else at first. What changed? Why did they rethink that?
Well, as more fossils turn up over the years, paleontologists compare things. And some started thinking, maybe these bones are actually something totally different.
Okay.
And then in 2000, a paleontologist named David Schur informally called it Allosaurus.
Allosaurus, never heard of it.
Right, because it was informal. It wasn't published with a proper scientific description, so it's what we call a nomen nudum.
A naked name. Basically a placeholder that didn't stick.
Exactly. Doesn't count officially in the scientific record.
So how did it get the name we use now, Shaochilong?
That didn't happen until 2009. A team, led by Stephen Broussard, took a really close look at those original fossils.
A fresh set of eyes.
Yeah. And their analysis convinced them this was definitely its own unique thing, its own genus. So they formally named it Shaochilong martuensis.
And what were they actually working with? What bones did they find?
The material was pretty decent, actually. Some really informative skull bits.
Like?
Parts of the brain case, bits of the skull roof, the quadrates, those connect the jaws.
Right.
And right maxilla, that's part of the upper jaw, holds the teeth. Plus the axis vertebra, which is the second neck bone, and six tail vertebrae.
I think our sources mentioned something went missing, though.
Ah, yes. Good point. There was apparently a piece of the left maxilla, the other side, found originally. But it seems to have gotten lost somewhere along the way, before that crucial 2009 redescription. It's a bit frustrating, paleontologically speaking.
Yeah, losing pieces of the puzzle is always tough. Now, you mentioned the 2009 paper, but then there's a note about a lectotype being designated in 2010. Why do that? What's a lectotype?
Right, so designating a lectotype is important, even if they thought all the bones came from one animal.
Which they probably did.
They probably did, but you can't always be 100% sure, especially with older finds. So they picked one specific piece, or a few associated pieces in this case, the brain case and part of the skull roof, to be the official name bearer for the species.
Like the official representative specimen.
Exactly. IVPPV 2885.1, that's its number. It anchors the name. If it turns out later there were actually bits of two different animals mixed up, or if there's any debate, everyone knows this specific fossil is what Shaochilong martuensis is based on. It adds stability.
Got it. Clears things up. Okay, let's get back to that classification. The shark-toothed name hinted at it. Where did Broussard and his team place it in 2009?
They placed it firmly within the Carcharodontosauridae.
And that family is?
That's the family of, well, some truly giant predatory dinosaurs. Think Giganotosaurus, Carcharodontosaurus itself, the really big ones with those shark-like teeth.
Wow. So finding one in Asia was significant.
Hugely significant. If that classification was right, Shaochilong would have been the first definite Carcharodontosaurid known from Asia. It suggests that this group was way more widespread than people thought.
A whole new branch of these mega predators over there. And didn't the initial analysis link it more closely to the southern ones from Gondwana?
Yes, exactly. The first phylogenetic study suggested it was actually closer relatives with the Gondwanan giants like Pteranodon, Mappasaurus, Giganotosaurus, rather than the ones found in Laurasia, the northern continents like Neovenator or Acrocanthosaurus.
That's fascinating from a biogeography perspective, right? How these things moved around as the continents broke up.
Absolutely. It fed into those big picture questions about dinosaur dispersal.
So what specific features, what bone details made them think Carcharodontosaurid back then?
Well, the 2010 description went into detail, listing several unique features. Autopomorphies, they called them.
Okay, like what?
Things like a reduced, almost missing depression on the maxilla, the upper jawbone, in front of the eye socket. No groove on the inside surface of that bone where ligaments might attach.
Hmm.
Also, deep vertical grooves between the teeth sockets in the upper jaw. An air pocket, a pneumatic recess going way back into the nasal bone on the snout. A distinct crest running along the top of the skull.
A sagittal crest.
Yeah, on the frontal bone. And a large air sac opening, a foramen, in a specific part of the brain case, the prosodic bone.
Okay, that's quite a list of fairly technical points. But basically, these specific shapes and holes in the bones were the clues.
At the time, yes. These were the key anatomical markers that seemed to tie it strongly to the Carcharodontosaurids.
All right, so if it was a Carcharodontosaurid, what was it like? How big was it? What was its role?
Based on the size of his tooth row in the maxilla, they estimated its total length at maybe 5 to 6 meters.
So about 16 to 20 feet.
Roughly, yeah. And they estimated its thigh bone, the femur, was about 61.5 centimeters long. That puts its weight somewhere around 500 kilograms, maybe 1,100 pounds.
That's a decent predator, but the sources say that's actually small for this group.
Exactly, uncharacteristically small. Most other Carcharodontosaurids were much bigger. We're talking titans.
So what did that imply?
Well, that size difference, and maybe a relatively shorter face compared to its giant cousins, made researchers think Shaochilong might have had a different lifestyle.
Like a different ecological niche, hunting smaller prey, maybe?
Possibly. Or just different strategies. It wouldn't necessarily be competing directly with the absolute apex predators if there were even larger ones around we haven't found yet.
Interesting. So it was seen as this sort of medium-large predator for its time and place in Cretaceous Asia.
Right, and significant because, at the time, it was thought to be the youngest known allosauride, that bigger group, including Carcharodontosaurs from Laurasia. It seemed to fill a specific spot.
The science marches on, doesn't it? The story didn't end there.
Not at all.
Yeah.
This is where it gets really fascinating, and you see science kind of correcting itself. That Carcharodontosaurid classification has been seriously questioned by more recent work.
How so? What new evidence came up?
Well, part of it is just ongoing research refining the dates. A 2024 study looked at the Mialgu Formation again, suggesting the age might be anywhere from the Barremian to the Albian stages of the early Cretaceous. A wider window.
Okay, refining the timeline. But the classification itself.
More importantly, yeah, several newer phylogenetic analyses, those computer-based studies mapping evolutionary relationships, have really cast doubt on it being a Carcharodontosaurid at all.
Oh, so if not a Carcharodontosaurid, then what?
Get this.
Yeah.
That same 2024 study, the one describing a dinosaur called Upcaracush, their big analysis actually recovered Shaochilong as a member of the Tyrannosauroidea.
Wait, what? Tyrannosauridia, as in related to T-Rex?
Exactly, part of that lineage. A huge shift.
Wow. From a cousin of Giganotosaurus to potentially an early relative of Tyrannosaurus? That's massive.
It's a major rethink. And it wasn't just a one-off finding. Another study in 2025, this one describing an African dinosaur called Tamaryraptor, also found Shaochilong came out as a tyrannosauroid in their analyses.
So, multiple independent studies pointing the same way.
Seems like it. And that Tamaryraptor paper specifically mentioned that Shaochilong shares several key features, derived features, with known tyrannosauroids.
And what about those features that originally linked it to Carcharodontosaurids?
They basically reevaluated them. They argued that some of those features might not be exclusive to Carcharodontosaurids after all, or might be interpreted differently. Maybe they show up in other theropod groups too. Convergent evolution, perhaps, or just features common to a broader group.
So those initial shark-toothed clues might have been, well, not wrong, but maybe not as definitive as first thought.
Exactly. Just shows how important it is to keep finding more fossils, keep refining our analytical methods. New data can completely change the picture.
Now, just to cover all bases, there was also a 2022 paper mentioned on a dinosaur called Meraxes. Where did that study put Shaochilong?
Ah, right, the Meraxes paper. Their cladogram, their evolutionary tree diagram, actually placed Shaochilong as the sister taxon, the closest relative, to Carcharodontosaurinae.
Which is?
A specific subgroup within the Carcharodontosauridae family. So that study still kept it in the Carcharodontosaurid camp, just in a very specific spot.
Okay, so even recently there was still support for the Carcharodontosaurid idea.
Yes, which highlights that this isn't always a straight line. Science progresses, different analyses might yield slightly different results depending on the data used or the methods, but the trend in the very latest research seems to be leaning towards Tyrannosauridea. It's an active area of debate.
Fascinating, a real scientific detective story unfolding. Okay, let's just pin down the timing again. When did Shaochilong live?
So based on the rocks it was found in, the Miao Formation, the accepted range is early Cretaceous, spanning the Barremian to Albian stages,
Which is roughly
129 to 100 million years ago, give or take. Some researchers, looking at all the other types of animals found alongside it, suggest maybe a slightly tighter window, more like Aptian to Albian. So still early Cretaceous, but maybe the later part of the early Cretaceous.
Got it. And that main specimen, the lectotype brain case, its official number for the record.
That's IVPP V28885.1.
Okay. And we're pretty sure this animal was grown up, an adult.
Seems likely, yes. The bones of the brain case are all fused together nicely. That's usually a sign of skeletal maturity in dinosaurs, suggesting it was an adult or at least a near-adult individual.
Right. Okay, let's try and wrap our heads around this. Shaochilong mayortuensis, early Cretaceous dinosaur from China.
Yep.
Fascinating history. Started out looking like maybe a unique, kind of smallish Asian member of the giant Carcharodontosaurids.
The shark-toothed dragons, yeah.
But now, more recent, pretty compelling evidence seems to be shifting it over towards the tyrannosaurids, the lineage that eventually leads to T-Rex.
That's the current thinking based on the latest studies. It's a fantastic example of how paleontology works. New finds, new analyses, they constantly reshape our understanding. Shaochilong's story is really a testament to that dynamic process.
So, thinking bigger picture, what does this potential shift mean? You've got Carcharodontosaurids and Tyrannosaurids. They're quite different beasts, right? Different sizes, body shapes, maybe different hunting styles,
Absolutely.
generally speaking.
So if Shaochilong jumps from one group to the other, what does that tell us, or what questions does it raise about how these big predator groups were evolving and spreading out, especially in Asia during the Cretaceous?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It potentially redraws the map of which major predator lineages were dominant where and when. If Shaochilong is an early tyrannosauroid, it pushes their significant presence in Asia back earlier, perhaps? It complicates the picture of Carcharodontosaurid distribution, too. And it makes you wonder what other fossils might still be out there waiting to be found that could finally settle Shaochilong's identity crisis, right? What piece of evidence would really lock it down?
Exactly. More complete skeletons are always the dream, of course. Finding more skull material or postcranial bones that show clear, unambiguous features of one group or the other. That's what researchers will be hoping for. It really leaves you thinking.
Definitely food for thought. Well, that's our deep dive into the enigmatic Shaochilong. Thanks for joining us.